Nigeria to 2,802. Out of the number, 417 have been discharged, while 93 died. The breakdown of the new cases shows that Lagos has 76, Katsina 37, Jigawa 32, Kano 23, FCT 19 and Borno 18. Others are Edo 10, Bauchi 9, Adamawa 6, Oyo and Ogun 5 each, while Ekiti, Osun, Benue, Niger and Zamfara states have 1 case each. Meanwhile, the number of new coronavirus cases in Russia has risen by 10,102 over the past 24 hours. This brought Russia's nationwide tally to 155,370. The country's coronavirus crisis response center said on Tuesday. It also reported 95 new deaths from COVID-19, bringing the total death toll in Russia to 1,451. The Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed has identified fake news as a major hindrance in the current fight against COVID-19. The minister disclosed this at the daily briefing by the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 in Abuja. Lai Mohammed explained that misinformation and fake news is stagnating, all efforts being marshaled to combat the pandemic. To this end, journalists are relied upon as part of those working in the front line to deliver timely and accurate information to the populace, as it is essential and critical to remain professional. He commended Nigerian journalists and their colleagues around the world for their sacrifice and hard work, describing them as heroes of the fight against COVID-19, urging them not to relent in their role in fighting COVID-19 until the disease is defeated. World Hygiene Day is celebrated every year on 5th of May to mobilize people around the world to increase adherence to hand hygiene in healthcare facilities. It also aims at protecting healthcare workers and patients from infection. 2 marked tankers, one loaded with 50,000 litres of kerosene and the other with 45,000 litres of diesel, have collided at Otedola Bridge, Inward Berger in Lagos. An eyewitness account said the accident occurred due to reckless driving by the 2 drivers who were on top speed, resulting in the accident. The impact led to the tanker loaded with diesel spilling its content on the road. No casualty was recorded, but vehicular movement along the axis has been slowed down. Officers of the Lagos State Fire Service are on ground blanketing the affected areas in order to forestall the occurrence of any secondary accident. These are the news trending at this hour. Thanks for watching. I'm Juma Yusuf.
After more than a month of the restriction of movement order in Lagos, Ogun and the FCT, this week saw an easing of the lockdown protocols, which by the sheer number of humans on the streets on day one may need strict enforcement on all aspects of public gathering, interaction and contact. There's also the issue of an economy in need of a shot in the arm after a vigorous setting of agenda to boost the nation after a month-long enforced inertia. There's also the question of domestic competence in the production of personal protective equipment, PPEs, as a global pandemic lingers. This is Political Update, NTA's eclectic political ensemble, which focuses on the nation's political scene. I am Fisayo Ogunfuyi. Welcome. It has been a month of peeping out through the gates for many as government battened down the hatches to combat COVID-19 from spreading exponentially across the country. After the easing of the lockdown yesterday, anticipated return of human movement was supposed to be in trickles. However, what was witnessed in some places was a deluge.
We are supposed to go out and come back by 2 o'clock. And now, if one spends all this time on the road and they have not even reached the office, then yes, to a certain extent, the purpose may have been defeated.
From what I've observed going across the city center today, it's been quite encouraging and people are adhering to the instructions.
Meanwhile, the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has warned Nigerians that the relaxation of the 5-week lockdown could be reverted if its guidelines are not strictly adhered to. Chairman of the task force, Boss Mustafa, says this warning has become necessary following observations of clear breaches of PTF's guidelines on day one of the easing of the lockdown.
Preliminary reports.
This bold inscription on the podium at this PTF briefing is one of the guidelines not completely adhered to by Nigerians on the first day after the 5-week lockdown. Other noticeable violations, according to the task force, were lack of social distancing in public places and continued interstate movements despite the ban in place.
The chaotic scenes around the banks and other financial institutions indicate that there is observable high level of breaches by the citizens. The PTF fully understands the desire of Nigerians to come out to continue their lives after 5 weeks of lockdown. State governments and security agencies have, however, been advised to enforce the measures rigidly, and violators will be prosecuted.
On the part of the banks, we've also resolved that we are going to encourage the banks to restock their ATM machines so that unless you have really need to be physically present at banks, you don't need to be there.
Yes, we might have a few extra infections today and tomorrow, but what we don't want is an explosion of new infections. If we do have that explosion, there will be almost no choice left for the leadership of the country than to ask all of us to go back into our homes.
The task force has continued to strengthen the capacity of the Kano state government to respond to the pandemic in the state.
The Federal Ministry of Health pathologist is also participating in the investigation of the unexplained deaths that were reported.
We have also mobilized 3,300 informants through the WHO polio program for a house-to-house search, and will be commencing a 7-day motorized campaign across major urban areas in Kano.
With about 4,000 Nigerians abroad interested in returning home, the Minister of Foreign Affairs says evacuation is set to commence.
The first flight that we hope by God's grace to have on Wednesday, Emirates, their flight from Dubai will be to Lagos.
Also, we are initiating a program of decontaminating and disinfecting our schools before they open.
Meanwhile, schools as well as places of worship are to remain closed.
We'll return to some excerpts from that briefing later on in the program. But meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari this Monday participated in an online summit by the non-aligned movement where heads of government of the movement of the view that national, regional and global strategies, will be required to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. State House correspondent Jide Onifade reports that President Muhammadu Buhari at the summit assured that his administration will intensify efforts to curb community spread of the virus in Nigeria.
The coronavirus is a phenomenon that needs global efforts to solve. That's how these leaders view the pandemic, which they say has caused irreparable loss, ravaged humanity, and caused unprecedented devastation to the well-being of people, their livelihoods, and global economy. They expressed efforts of individual nations to curb the spread, but as President Muhammadu Buhari observes, it is evident that no nation can independently and single-handedly tackle the pandemic.
We must therefore form a united front against this common enemy by being coordinated and timely in our response. Furthermore, we must all encourage and empower our scientists and medical experts to join the quest for a vaccine and cure to this universal plague. In addition, we must acknowledge the central role of the United Nations and the World Health Organization in fighting the pandemic. It is therefore essential to fully collaborate and support their initiatives in coordinating the international fight against the pandemic Such efforts should include the protection of our medical workers, the provision of medical supplies, especially test kits, and ultimately finding a vaccine to cure the disease.
The president says the task before the international community remains daunting and more needs to be done to reduce the impact of COVID-19.
In the spirit of solidarity, we must collectively appeal to international financial institutions to assist member states in cushioning the negative impact of the pandemic. In this regard, I urge them to extend concessional loans, technical assistance support, lowering of tariff on medical equipment and consumables, sharing of exercise in case management, adopting open trade policies, as well as outright debt cancellation to our member countries.
We must ensure that an effective response to COVID-19 reaches everyone, everywhere, and that they all prevails.
Exchange of medical experts and the expertise gained in the fight against the virus, sharing of information and scientific knowledge, as well as extending assistance to the countries in need, is of utmost importance.
President of the United Nations General Assembly, Tijani Muhammad Bande, pledged that his office would continue to work with the non-aligned movement to promote partnerships and galvanize the needed engagement to defeat COVID-19 and reduce its impact on communities. The theme of the extraordinary summit is United Against COVID-19 Pandemic.
All right, talking about the United Front Against COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining us is Dr. Abiodun Adeni, Associate Professor and Head of Mass Communication Department, Bayes University. It's been a while. You've been on lockdown.
Yeah, sure. Good to be here again.
The gates were partially opened, or were supposed to be partially opened yesterday, and like the report said, what was supposed to be a trickling became a deluge.
Yeah, I think the rush was actually predictable, not just because people were somewhat tired of staying at home, but of course people were yet to come to terms with the reality before us, with the new normal. And of course I think we still have a lot more to do with our messaging. Our messaging, for instance, for now seems to be concentrated amongst, perhaps not by design, but amongst the elites, through the prism of the traditional media, television, radio, newspapers at all, and one other. We need to go down to the grassroots, communicate specifically to those at the lower rung of the economic ladder. If it is possible, we need to make our message much more morbid, so we can capture their imagination, so that they can realize that their health, their life is at risk here. And that's why you see them still living in denial, still not imbibing some of the things that we need to imbibe in this new period of the pandemic. Things like the need for us to be socially distant or being physically distant, washing hands every 20 minutes, and if there's no water, sanitize, and social distancing is very, very important, like we've been told by the medics, to mitigate, to interrupt this spread. But of course, among a cross-section of the Nigerian populace, this message is not yet sinking, and that's what I'm talking about, morbid messaging, if that is what will capture their imagination. And let's not forget again that there are still other channels that government can still explore. And what are these channels? You and I will refer to it, like I said somewhere else, as below the line traditional media, posters, using of town criers, within the communities. Because this lockdown, even while it was in force, was only evident in the urban areas. What about the rural areas? Life was still going on. In the marketplaces, life was still going on, as if nothing was amiss, And this is very dangerous for the spreading of these virus. So messaging has to be increased amongst this set of people, because as it were, it looks like just as if we're in a monologue, soliloquy, talking to ourselves. The elites, that is, the elites, yes, are much more conscious, but those at the lower rung of the economic ladder are still yet to accept, what is at hand, and it's a problem for government, and that's why you see a lot of them rushed out yesterday, almost almost breaking down bank gates, and doing all such things. You see them still very close, as if we're in normal times. That's why the only way we can deal with this, is, to reorder, change our messaging pattern. Perhaps it could get to them at that level. But let's not forget again that what government is trying to do is a very difficult thing, really. Living between the devil and the deep blue sea. The devil of preventing a pandemic, of preserving life, and the deep blue sea of not allowing our economy to continue on a tailspin. So a balance has to be found. And what is that balance? The balance can be found through communication, increased communication, reordering of our messaging, so that it can sink among the predominantly illiterate members of the Nigerian society.
Earlier last week, there were, communication from different, agencies and all that in terms of the personnel that may be needed for the gradual easing of the lockdown. But everybody trooped out. Is it in violation of some of these edicts, or is just as you have rightly mentioned? Communication gap.
Yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make. It's still a result of the gap because the messages are very clear. We see government officials addressing press conferences every other day. We see NCDC Director General, practically every hour. It's on television, it's on radio talking. What more can they do other than just tweaking the messaging a little bit? In terms of presence, they have registered a good presence. Communication Director General of NCDC, Minister of Information, Secretary to the government, all the officials, the Presidential Task Force, they've registered very good presence, but the message and the channel has to be tweaked. Otherwise, because what it means is that the message was not sinking at all. From what we saw yesterday, the message is not sinking.
Perhaps you are thinking of involving the traditional institutions, for instance.
Yeah, of course, in this kind of, when you're in crisis, we're in a period of experiment.
I'm from a riverine environment, for instance. I have asked these questions if the fishermen are still going to sea, and the question has been in the affirmative, because how do you lock down people who go to sea with their canoes and all that? So that means the traditional institution must play a very vital role.
Absolutely, not just the traditional
community and to a reasonable extent to religious heads.
Absolutely. We're in a period of experiment, so anything that can be deployed should actually be used, to deal with this thing, And with the lockdown, you see, even the blind could see, even the deaf could hear that something was amiss, But understanding what was amiss was a problem. There was a problem of understanding. People were yet to appreciate it. They just thought that it's still a minor thing. We can still undermine it. We can still live our lives. Sometimes, God forbid, until the thing strikes somebody that is very close to you, before you know that this thing is actually very dangerous, that a demon is in town. But we do not hope that people will begin to witness this thing personally before they realize the danger that is with us. But what we can do to help the situation, again, is to ensure that we tweak our messaging, and not just tweaking it, but the channel, like you said, traditional institutions are there, religious institutions are there, and besides using this thing as a two-step flow, we can also go directly to them using old methods that can still be very effective. In some communities in Nigeria, they still use town criers to get to people. There's nothing wrong with using this. There's nothing says that as long as it's effective, there's nothing says that it is antediluvian. We're talking about productivity and efficiency here. If it is efficient, let's use it. And that's what it is.
In some villages and areas, once you hear that it's an instruction from the king, then you
of course they listen. They know that it's something. Yeah, that's right.
All right. Let's look at an aspect of this, and that is, you mentioned the messaging. There's also been issues of distortions in terms of in the social media, all kinds of new information, not necessarily correct, that we've seen. Some have induced panic, some have induced a laissez-faire approach to everything. How do we begin to battle this?
Yeah, I think it's something that has been with us, the social media, digital media. It's been with us before, and we've always said that discretion matters, a sense of discernment matters. But again, the problem of the preponderance of illiteracy will still haunt us in this regard. You could see, you understand that people who are more enlightened are less likely to believe anything thrown at them than people who are less enlightened. So, what we need in that circumstance is an increased sense of discernment, which I know it's not common, it's not general. But again, we also have to acknowledge the fact that some of these messages can be very sophisticated and can even capture the imagination of the so-called enlightened. But again, you need to choose your channel carefully.
All right, that's
choose your channel carefully.
Takes us to the next story. Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed has identified fake news as a major hindrance in the current fight against COVID-19. He was saying this in his brief yesterday during the COVID-19, the PTF on COVID-19, that press briefing. Let's hear from the Minister of Information.
The fight against COVID-19 pandemic has been made more difficult by misinformation and fake news. And we have had to rely on you journalists working right in the front line to deliver timely and accurate information to the populace. So to all of you, gentlemen of the press, sitting here, and indeed to all journalists across the country and across the world, we commend you for your sacrifice and hard work.
So it's a case of removing the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah. It's something that, like I said, has always been with us. And I don't know how much you can appeal to people who are in their closets, who are probably exhibiting the trace of being nymphomaniacs, being psychopaths. I don't know how much you can appeal to them from sending in danger or dangerous messages to the system. Some people derive some kind of ironic joy from doing that. You probably cannot stop them, But what you need to do is to up your own ante in terms of recognizing which one is good and the one that is bad. But again, like I was saying again, the difference between good and bad, rests largely on your level of enlightenment, your level of exposure and understanding. Even if the divide can also be blurred sometimes. But again, choose your channel properly, be careful what you believe, and perhaps check and double check.
And of course, when we're talking about your channel, of course, the Nigerian Television Authority has been there from the beginning to make sure that you separate the wheat from the chaff as far as information, credible information, especially from government, is concerned. Now, we spoke about something earlier, global leaders talking about the pandemic. And as communities around the world demand the supply of personal protective equipment, PPEs, in the wake of coronavirus pandemic, health experts and other citizens are responding to this need by developing process technologies and skills to produce these essentials. Our own Timothy Yusuf got one of this scenario.
Rising demand, panic buying, hoarding and misuse have disrupted the global supply of PPEs according to the World Health Organization, therefore putting lives at risk.
It is a very disturbing situation. Not just in Nigeria, it's a global thing. As you can see, the numbers are getting scary every day, particularly in advanced democracies like the US, Europe, and other countries in Asia, and so on.
A cross-section of Nigerians have resorted to the use of locally made face masks. The encouragement from President Muhammadu Buhari for increased domestic competence in the production of PPEs provided the impetus for this renewed vigor in the application of local skills in the manufacturing of face masks.
Or rather, the seal around the nose and mouth should be able to give you a close facial fit, preventing any airborne particle, from getting into the body. If subjected to careful testing, you should be able to prevent small particles, less than 0.3 microns, from getting or being inhaled into the body. And of course, coronavirus is more than 0.3 microns. Now, when compared to the conventional surgical face masks that we have,
I know that a lot of Nigeria will be safe. Face mask is the next phase to face out coronavirus in Nigeria. And we must endeavor to wear face masks anytime we are going out.
Many say the escalating cost of PPEs has precipitated the move for a scaling up in their production locally.
All right, we're seeing, Nigerians respond always when there's an, there's an emergency like this. I remember there was this scarcity of fuel at the time when we had this sawdust stove.
That's
and all
right.
that in the mid-90s. But looking at all this in terms of moving forward now, the next few weeks, what should we be looking at in terms of this gradual easing and, of course, refiring our economy while trying to battle a raging pandemic?
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing, and we have seen it happening across the world. There's been a battle between how you have to sustain or preserve your economy, at the same time sustain or keep lives, prevent deaths from this pandemic. It's been, even in the most sophisticated society, we've seen it. We see every day debates in the United States, in the UK, and everywhere else. So we are not, we cannot be shut out of this. We are also very concerned, and ours is even more problematic because of our state of development, But in trying to find that balance, we just have to be careful. I understand the last time that government probably caved into the pressure tactics of the business community, economists who said that we cannot manage a long lockdown, but we don't want a situation where it will come back and hurt us, where this thing will boomerang. And that's why government need to act fast. First, in the area of communication that I keep saying, expanding the channels, broadening it, getting down to the mass of the people who have less understanding, who belong to the lower economic rung. And secondly, being watchful. If we have to go back to the lockdown, it's fine, let's go back to it. It's not going to be the first time that we're going to see it. It has happened in history, and that's why during the 1917-1918 pandemic, we had 3 waves, because there was a lockdown, it was reversed, and it came back again, So there's nothing wrong if we have to go back to it. The important thing is, if we do not have life, we are very nervous, we are anxious, everybody is worried. So it's not something that is peculiar to anybody. It's a general thing. So government need to act fast if the need arises.
All right, we've had Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, Associate Professor and Head of Mass Communication Department, Biz University, coming out of the lockdown to be a part of the program. Thank you very much for being a part of it. This has been Political Update for today, the 5th of May. And I want to thank you for being a part of it. Keep on watching the Nigerian Television Authority, where we give you unbeatable and the very best of news, reviews, previews, and interviews. My name is Fisa Ogunfi. Keep urging you to keep it safe and remain blessed. Bye-bye.